Welcome to Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation possible. You will get to hear from CSIA system integrators and industry partners to get a better understanding of how they help their clients solve process challenges and how they've earned success in their careers. Along the way, we will touch on system integration best practices, technology, trends, and challenges. Whether you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator, you will enjoy the insights these industry professionals bring to this podcast. Let's get started. Hi, my name is Lisa Richter, the host of Talking Industrial Automation, a podcast where you get to know the people who make modern industrial automation and processing possible. In today's episode, we're talking industrial automation with Bryan DeBois, who is the Director of Industrial AI at RoviSys, one of the largest independent global system integrators focused on manufacturing and industrial customers. During the 20 years he's worked there, he has focused on manufacturing execution systems, historians, plant floor software, and level 3 information solutions in the operational technology space. Bryan's current focus is on technologies such as artificial intelligence, data infrastructure, and advanced analytics to boost the productivity of global manufacturers. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here.
So tell me how you got started in this whole crazy business.
I started at RoviSys as a co-op in 2000, and I was working on a computer science degree from the University of Akron. And really coming into this space, I knew nothing about manufacturing, didn't know anything about control systems. I was a big fan of a TV show called How It's Made. So I had seen kind of the inside of a factory from that show and that aspect of it. And so when I actually got there and I started to learn about what RoviSys does as a co-op, I got really excited about that, got to go on some plant tours early in my career, and that got me really jazzed. And so, I ended up staying. So I did my co-op period there for 2 years, and then I started full-time in 2002. And now, if you fast forward 24 years later, I'm still at RoviSys. Now, as you mentioned, in that Director of Industrial AI space, and I'm still getting to solve a lot of really cool problems in this manufacturing space.
So RoviSys is kind of a brand name in the industry, if we can say that there are really brand names in the industry. But maybe people aren't really familiar with the history of the company. So tell me a little bit about how it began and evolved over, the past 30, 40 years.
Yeah, 35. Yeah. So 1989, RoviSys was started by a gentleman named John Robertson, who is still there. He's our CEO now. And his vision was to create an independent system integrator in this operational technology or OT space. And honestly, it really was unheard of at the time in the late 80s. Every SI would have been tightly tied to a specific vendor or platform. So this concept of an independent SI didn't really exist, but he was really adamant that this was what the future was going to look like, that a lot of these platforms were going to start to become a commodity. And also that he saw, he talked to customers and he knew that they were starting to get fed up with this vendor lock-in that was kind of the industry standard in the late 80s. And so he started this independent SI. And the beauty of that is that we can really build a single solution, regardless of how many platforms it touches, how many legacy systems, doesn't matter. We can build a single solution that solves a problem for the customer. And honestly, that's typically when I run into somebody who's maybe tangential to our world and doesn't really understand what an SI does, that's really how I explain it to them. I say, we build a single solution that solves a problem, regardless of how many vendors or platforms it needs to integrate to. And then John also saw that there was really a global need for this type of a thing. And so he actually helped start CSIA.
Is he really that involved in the organization now, or is he on a boat somewhere on
a little column A, little column B. He still loves boats, still out on boats, if you know John. But his vision right now, he's handed over the day-to-day operations. We've got presidents and things like that. But his vision really now is expansion. And so he's really involved in looking at where should we go next and setting up. And I can't say right now, but you'll see RoviSys offices spring up all over the world in the next couple of years. So that's really his vision right now.
Well, you mentioned that you're agnostic, but are there any industries or products or disciplines that you specialize in? And if so, why?
we have kind of a heritage of more process industries. And so we like to say that our customers oftentimes make stuff, not things. So gallons of stuff versus countable widgets things. Now, that actually is not true anymore because several years ago, we actually started to get into the discrete manufacturing space, and we've now landed and expanded pretty significantly there. So, but if you think about those traditional process industries, so you've got chemicals and life sciences, this is the pharmaceutical side of life sciences, and food and beverage and oil and gas and those types of industries, but then also consumer packaged goods. We've got our whole materials. We've got building management, warehouse management, water and wastewater. So we've really expanded pretty significantly. We now have federal solutions. So that team is going after specifically those federal types of contracts and things like that. And then data centers, as well as power and energy, have both been big beachheads for us. I would say why those ones, it's probably more a question of we're very opportunistic. So we've been very fortunate in that we have been able to grow almost exclusively through word of mouth. So we really don't advertise. We don't have a lot of marketing materials out there. And so oftentimes we're working with somebody who really likes us. They leave that company, they go to a completely different industry, but they still want to work with us. And so we've been able to kind of almost like a virus kind of expand to all these other industries through that mechanism. And sometimes it's internal growth where we hire somebody and they really are passionate about us expanding into a certain industry. That was kind of the case with discrete manufacturing, and said, we can make a huge impact there. We need to be doing more there. And the rest is history. Our discrete manufacturing has taken off hugely. So that's kind of the why. Now, the how we do it, I think, is interesting too, because I don't know, now that I've worked at this company for almost 25 years, I don't know how else you would structure an SI in this space. And that's that each of those industries I just talked about is an actual vertical division within RoviSys. So we're actually structured in the exact same way I just described. So each of those has a director who is over that, as well as SMEs and dedicated engineers who have done hundreds of projects in that. And what we find is that's really what our customers want, is they want that depth of expertise. When you go into that first meeting, they want to hear all the buzzwords. They want to hear the problems that they typically encounter. That's what they want to hear from our experts. So that's actually how we've structured ourselves.
There's a lot of cross-pollination advantages as well to that approach,
For
where
sure.
a customer knows their business, but might be able to hear some things that other businesses are doing that they maybe hadn't thought of. So that's another advantage, I imagine, for you guys.
100%.
So tell me about the suppliers that you work with.
It's all the major platforms that are in our world. So from Aviva to Siemens, GE, ABB, and Rockwell, of course, and National Instruments, and on the MES side, Parsec and those types of folks, Schneider, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some. But then what else has been interesting has been, as this IT/OT convergence has continued that we've been talking about now probably for 5 to 7 years, we're now working pretty heavily with some of these traditionally IT vendors. So Cisco and Microsoft and AWS. We've got great relationships with these traditionally IT companies as they continue their march into our OT space. So that's been really interesting.
Are you certified or endorsed? I have to imagine that you are.
Oh, yeah. We're typically in the top tier with all those partners. Yeah.
So what challenges are your customers facing right now?
The number one that I'm hearing over and over again that's kind of every industry has their own specific issues, but the number one thing I'm hearing is this labor shortage. So the last number I saw, I think was from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, said that there was about a 500,000 person shortfall right now in terms of unfilled jobs in the manufacturing and industrial space. That's a big deal. But even a bigger deal than that is this brain drain that we're seeing, where those folks, and they're primarily from the boomer generation, those folks who really knew everything there was to know about how to run and maintain this equipment are leaving. It was starting, but it accelerated significantly during COVID. And so now you're left with, an example I'll give you is I was up in Canada talking to a vinyl extrusion company, and I sat down with the plant manager. And we were talking specifically about leveraging AI to try to help augment their workforce. And he said, I've got 2 guys who are absolute experts at running this vinyl extrusion line. No one can run it better than these guys. And both of them are less than 5 years from retirement. And he said, I have no bench. He said, I've got 1 and 2 year guys. Nobody really wants to stick around for that long. Just the reality of The generations that are coming up right now are that nobody wants to spend the next decade learning everything there is to know about running a vinyl extrusion line. And we can hope and wish and pray it wasn't that way, but it just is. So then it's just like, well, now what are we going to do to try to solve that? And so that's really where my customers are. Now, for RoviSys part in all this, we have a unique offering. It's called autonomous AI. And what that is we are able to use a mechanism called machine teaching. That's where we actually extract the expertise from those SMEs before they leave. We build it into the AI, and then it's actually able to learn. It plays against itself like a game. It plays against itself until it gets to expert level at that particular task, and actually then can look over the shoulder of a 1 and 2 year guy and say, okay, actually, you're going to want to turn this knob up. You're going to want to turn this heat down over here. It can actually advise that person on how best to operate the line. So you get to finally capture that expertise before those folks leave. It makes me really nervous, honestly, having been so close to this industry for so long, watching all that expertise go out the door. I'm very nervous about the future of these companies and how they're going to keep this stuff running. Anyway, this is one way we're trying to help to contribute to fixing that, is through that use of autonomous AI.
So it would be super interesting to have, like, you know how in chess they have the computer play like the chess champion?
Yes.
It'd be super interesting to have like your senior vinyl extrusion dude play the AI and see.
So it's so funny that you say that. So let's dig a little into what the underlying technology is to autonomous AI. So it's actually built on what's called deep reinforcement learning. And deep reinforcement learning came out of DeepMind, which was a Google spinoff around 2016. And the very first thing that they had it do was play the game of Go. And then the very second thing they had to do was play the game of chess. And then they moved on to Atari games. They moved on to StarCraft. And it actually did beat our grandmasters at chess. And then it went on to beat our most sophisticated chess software. And the crazy thing about it is the way it learns, DRL learns, is it does learn exactly that way. It plays against itself. And by the time it's done, it's like it's played 100 years of chess. There are about 12 opening moves in chess that have been around for hundreds, thousands of years. And it independently discovered 10 of those 12 opening moves just on its own. And if you think about how difficult it would be to beat a grandmaster, human grandmaster at chess, they're going to pull out strategies and things that it never saw during its training. And yet the other thing that's really unique about DRL is its ability to find novel solutions, even in the face of inputs it's never seen before. So that was games. Now, fast forward, that was 2016. Fast forward many years later, and we have, along with this, came through Microsoft Research. That's how we got involved. But we have really been kind of on the forefront then of applying this technology in the form of autonomous AI to these same problems in the manufacturing sphere. The one thing that we add that DeepMind didn't do is DeepMind did not give it any a priori knowledge. So it did not have it sit down with an SME, a chess master, and say, here's our typical opening moves and things like that. What we do through that machine teaching is we actually do that. And so that's where we actually sit down, and those experts that you're talking about actually help to train and guide that. We call it a brain, a neural network trained this way is called a brain. They actually help to guide that brain in its decision-making until it gets at least to the caliber of the expert that was training it.
OMG. Can you believe it's the middle of the year already? I find that, well, shocking. On the upside, it means I can offer you something special if one of your goals is to join CSIA. And why wouldn't you? This global community has so much to offer SIs, from best practices to certification, professional development, and even access to professional services experts, including insurance, financial, and legal, who understand the SI's unique business needs. For partner members, CSIA offers an ecosystem to grow your SI programs, understand your customers' pain points, monitor industry trends, and share your thought leadership. Best of all, CSIA is a soft place to land. By that, I mean it is a community of like-minded people who are willing to share, commiserate, and celebrate your wins, your losses, and your vision. So what are you waiting for? Oh, wait, you're probably waiting for my special offer. Here it is. For the months of July and August, membership dues and all Industrial Automation Exchange upgrades and packages are half price. And no, this is not half off like I am crazy Jimmy yelling, everything must go. It's really just because CSIA prorates its dues. But boy, that lacks excitement, doesn't it? To find out more, visit www.controlsys.org/shine. Wait, maybe I should do the crazy Jimmy route after all.
We could see all the good things that could happen from a super brain like that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ever concerned about some negatives that might happen?
I try to address those head on, right? So there's a lot of kind of fear and uncertainty around what impact it could have. So typically those concerns fall into a couple different categories. One of them is job replacement, labor replacement, people losing their jobs because of this. We kind of already addressed that. These folks can't hire enough people. So that's not an issue. And even if you hire a new person, they've been doing it for 6 months, they don't have the expertise that the experts had. So they still need some kind of system to look over their shoulder. So it's not really a labor replacement. That typically doesn't even drive these projects. The second one, the typical concern is, what if this thing takes an action that a human wouldn't take and could blow up the plant or something like that? Well, a couple things there. One is that you already had a human there who maybe only had 2 weeks of training and could easily blow up the plant. Like, brain can't do anything that the human couldn't do. So if the human could pull a lever and do something like that, catastrophic. But then the other thing about that is that because it's all digital, we can actually constrain the actions that the brain can take more than you would actually constrain the actions a human can take. So I can actually say, yeah, well, the operator was able to operate between 1 and 100, and we only want it going between 20 and 80. Okay. So we add that extra constraint there. The last one that typically comes up is kind of the Skynet concern. And while this AI is extremely capable and it's really cool, it looks like magic when it's working, it's also very limited. It will do one thing really well, and that's run that part of the process. It can't somehow make decisions outside of that. It doesn't even really have a mechanism to break outside of that. So there's no really worry about, it's not self-replicating. I mean, a lot of that's kind of still very much science fiction. So this is not general artificial intelligence by any stretch of the imagination. So we can breathe easy.
So when you talk about, RoviSys and how it's grown, I imagine a lot of your business is repeat. Are you able to quantify that and why you think they return?
I mean, it varies, but typically we're about 85% repeat business year over year. I think that a couple factors there, we're independent, so we don't have to push any one platform or technology. One of the advantages there is that when you have a vendor come in, even an OT vendor, they have a hammer. And so they're just kind of looking for nails. With us being independent, we just get to pick whatever the best. We got a big toolbox of partners that we talked about. So we can just kind of pick the best tool that's going to solve that problem. And then the other nice thing about that is that we only really have to make up then that extra 15% of business every year that's not repeat business. And like I said, we have a lot of folks who really like us, and then clients who really like us, and then they move to another company and they take us with them, or they even just recommend us to one of their peers in the industry. And so again, we've been very fortunate from that standpoint. We hire really, really good people. We've got such a great team at RoviSys. I mean, they care so much about our customers and making them happy. We've got a great culture at RoviSys. So I think all of that just kind of combines to, make our customers really want to keep coming back. And one of the interesting things, and I tell our new engineers this, is that we're not like a vendor in that, a vendor, once you put their system in, it is kind of hard to rip it out. And they know that. And so they kind of have this continuous revenue stream, year over year. And they know that the cost of taking it out is prohibitive a lot of times. And so the vendors sometimes can get a little complacent, and we've seen it, and they don't necessarily prioritize the customer, and they make certain, maybe shareholder decisions or things like that. We don't have that, that privilege. And so I tell our new engineers, I say, when that project is over, the only reason why they're going to come back and do another project with us is because they had such a great time working with us. They found so much value in what we did, and we worked really hard for them. So we must be doing that, based on our numbers. But that's really, one of the things that I think is a unique challenge for an SI is exactly that.
Tell me about a project where it was super challenging and you or your team came up with a way to solve that problem.
The one I really get excited about talking about is I really like the idea of leveraging AI to solve unsolvable problems. So these are the problems that really have just plagued certain industries for a long time, certain customers. They probably have just thrown people at the problem. They kind of try to solve it with labor, or they just have lived with the fact that it's just a problem that they're never going to be able to solve. And so I really get excited about actually solving those problems. And we're doing that, which is really cool with AI. One of the recent ones was a glass bottle manufacturer. They've been pioneering this brand new way of creating glass bottles. They've been at it for a while and they made these huge strides, and it's amazing, this technology. But one of the challenges they saw is that it's a very finicky process. And so it really required a lot of twiddling of knobs and things like that to kind of get dialed in. And then it was a drifty process too. So even if you got dialed in, if one of those operators went to lunch for an hour and came back, when they came back, they're making off-spec bottles. And so they were like, we're not 100% sure how we're going to solve this, but we have not been able to solve this with any other tool. And so we came in with this autonomous AI. I mean, these are the exact kind of problems. Like the brain can be trained to get dialed into on-spec bottles. It can get back to making on-spec bottles if the process drifts faster than a human can. And so that's what we did. So we built an autonomous AI brain. They had 2 expert operators that we sat down with, really picked their brain and built in all of that knowledge into the brain and actually solved that problem for them, which was they were very impressed when we rolled this thing out. It's been pretty amazing.
What do you say is the smartest decision that RoviSys has made recently?
5 years ago, we hit our 30-year anniversary at RoviSys, and we had this big powwow. We had all of management there, and we had a bunch of the leaders from the organization. So I think there was 80 plus people in the room. And we kind of sat back and said, okay, so what's next? What's the next 30 years? What are they going to look like? And what we saw was that control system integration, it's still a huge part of our business. I don't want to downplay that, but it's looking like it's going to start to become a commodity. And when you have tools coming out like generative AI, and I know that all the Siemens of the world and the Rockwells of the world, they're all going to be looking at incorporating that ability to generate code through generative AI. And so, imagine being able to generate your ladder logic code and things like that, for your listeners who don't know, that's really the code that underlies the PLCs, the controllers that run our world. Imagine being able to auto-generate that. And so, some of these skills are becoming kind of a commodity. And so, what are the more higher value tasks that we can start to look at? And so we launched 3 horizontals. So I had talked about how RoviSys traditionally had been organized through these verticals, these divisions that were vertical. So we launched 3 horizontals. This is the first time we had ever had a horizontal at RoviSys, and we launched 3 of them. One of them was my division, Industrial AI, and I was very fortunate to be named the director of that. We have a horizontal that's just focused on MES, so that's manufacturing execution systems for your listeners. And then we have a division that does just industrial networking. And these were cross-cutting concerns, but they also were higher value tasks that an OTSI could take on. And they were in demand from our customers. Everything we do is always driven by what are our customers asking us for. And so these were 3 things that our customers were specifically asking us about a lot. And so we launched those 5 years ago. And the effect that has had is this tremendous growth in these high value tasks that we can now offer. And over the last 5 years, those 3 horizontals have grown tremendously. It also gives us access to conversations and to folks within the customer's organization that we have not traditionally been able to access before, because those are folks with VP titles and director of this and VP of digital transformation or VP of industry 4.0. Those folks want to talk to us now. We're not just seen as, well, those are the guys who kind of roll up and they fix the PLCs when they go down, they fix the line and they leave. Like, we really have been able to kind of define ourselves through that. And that's been really exciting and interesting. And I get excited about that because I'm very passionate about the fact that OTSIs, not just RoviSys, I think there's a role for lots of OTSIs in the space, but OTSIs have an opportunity right now to start to define what the future of manufacturing should look like. And if we don't, what's happening already right now is the big IT, the big 5 IT consulting companies, these big high-priced consultants who've never spent a day in a plant in their life, they're the ones who are going to set that script. They're the ones who are going to set that narrative. So I get really excited about that role that RoviSys has to play in defining that narrative for what the future of manufacturing should look like. And we have the chops to do that. We have the credibility to do that.
So you see this as a business opportunity for not only RoviSys, but other system integrators out there who maybe could learn those skills or have those conversations and build a diverse revenue stream that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that RoviSys has kind of always been the tip of the spear on a lot of these types of things. When I first started there, we had a robust software and information solutions level 3 group that was pushing the envelope on those types of things. And we had an army of software developers, whereas other OTSIs maybe had one. So I think we've always kind of been at the tip of the spear there. But yeah, I mean, I think that we'll continue to find new ways to define what an OTSI should be doing. And a lot of that's getting blurry too. We're working on traditionally IT systems now sometimes, and we're working heavily in the cloud with a lot of these customers, which traditionally has been the realm of the IT department. So I think that a lot of that's going to get blurry too. But why shouldn't we, right? So these IT vendors that I was talking about, these IT consultancies, they're pushing down into our space. After they get booted, we do a lot of cleanup of their projects and they're just a mess. So why shouldn't we be the ones who have that knowledge, who are really doing all that work? Let's go ahead and push up into the IT space as well, especially in that edge between OT and IT. That's really a space we can dominate.
If you're advising a customer about how they might go and find a system integrator to work with, what kinds of advice are you giving him or her?
I would say the first thing that they should do is they need to get out to conferences and they need to talk to other folks who are in their industry. I mean, word of mouth still, there's a ton of value in that and in referrals and things like that. So talk to other people in your industry and say, hey, is there a certain OTSI that you work with? Or is there anyone you can refer? Then go set up an interview with that SI. Understand if your cultures align, talk about what work that they've done in that industry, what problems they've solved in the past, talk about what ideas and new ideas that they can kind of bring to the table. I think that that's really important. See if you get excited talking to that OTSI. See if you leave that meeting like pumped about all the things you guys can do together and really dig. And then find a small project and execute that project with that SI. Find out how it is to work with them. Find out how they approach projects and what their kind of philosophies are and how they communicate and how they define success, and see how successful that project was. And if it was, after all that, go lock and load and just run with that SI. Now, the counterexample, this is the absolute worst way to find an OTSI, and that's to send an RFQ to 10 OTSIs and pick the one that's the cheapest. We still see that. Thankfully, I think that some of that is going away, but we still see that, and that's the way that these customers are finding an OTSI to work with. I mean, I couldn't imagine a worse way to find someone to work with. That's kind of my take on it.
I don't even think it's very fun for the customer having to find 10 people, send that RFP out, review all those RFPs. It's not great for anybody, I don't think. I would imagine.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Don't get mad. How many people in your life truly understand what it is that you do? I'm willing to guess the answer is not too many. I get it. So many of us toil in anonymity. But what if I told you that I have a place where you can go to meet and talk and commiserate with people who do understand what you do because they do the same thing? Amazing, I know. But that's really the bottom line what CSIA is all about. And recently, we've expanded our learning and networking opportunities to help you find your people. We're calling them special interest groups. These groups are aligned around topics such as emerging leaders or marketing, and they meet virtually throughout the year with some plans for meeting in person as well, probably in conjunction with the CSIA annual conference. We will be bringing more online throughout the year, but for now, if either of those topics sound interesting, go to www.controlsys.org/events to check out what we have lined up. Full disclosure, you do need to be a member of CSIA to join the marketing SIG, but the emerging leaders one is open to anyone who wants to give it a try. So why not take a minute and check out the upcoming schedule at www.controlsys.org/events. Your people are waiting.
So what other kinds of trends and challenges are you seeing in industrial automation right now?
The number one, as you can imagine, is AI. And now I'm probably biased because I'm having those conversations with customers, but we are just seeing so much that AI is changing and driving. But one of the really interesting things that is kind of a result of that is that my company is involved in more infrastructure upgrades than I've seen in our history. As you know, the equipment in our industry is 20, 30 years old. It's held together by duct tape and, and so we're suddenly finding that these companies are discovering this money to do these upgrades, these equipment upgrades they probably should have done 15 years ago, and they're finding this money. Now, why is that? So I just had a conversation with our pulp and paper SME. I just talked to him this morning about this, and we're doing some multi-million-dollar network and equipment infrastructure upgrades for some huge paper companies. And again, this is 20, 30-year-old equipment that we're finally getting around to upgrading. And I said, now, why is that? What's driving that? And he said, oh, corporate wants access to all that data on the plant floor. They've got big vision about AI and doing analytics with all of that. And so that story has played out again and again, where that carrot being dangled out there of AI then pulls through all of those projects that have been shelved for so long. So that's the other aspect. So yes, AI, but I'm finally seeing these infrastructure upgrades that should have been done a long time ago. Finally seeing those come to fruition has been really exciting. I had a customer, this was a couple years ago, but still, and they were still using relays. They wanted to do a big OEE project, and we looked at the equipment and we're like, look, guys, we can do it for the equipment that's running on PLCs, but this relay stuff, guys, it's time. It's time to upgrade these to PLCs. I mean, come on. A ton of PLC 5s, thankfully getting ripped out and replaced. So it's exciting from that standpoint.
Yeah. So before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about the convergence of OT and IT. And one of the things you mentioned to me was budgets, because I want you to make that point that we hear a lot of pushback. Show me the money is what we hear a lot. Show me the money, show me the money, show me the money. So tell me your take on that there may be budgets that people are not making the connection with immediately.
So one of the things that I think we sometimes fall into, and I'd imagine a lot of your audience is OTSI, so they should relate to this, is that they kind of are head down and they're focused on the problems in the plant, and that's great. But they lose sight of some of these bigger movements that are happening, things like sustainability, things like digital transformation, things like AI. And the key to understand there is if a big Fortune 500 corporation starts a sustainability initiative, they typically are attaching budget to that. And that budget oftentimes is in the millions, is measured in the millions. So we should be going after those projects. Now, it may be that we need to kind of change our tack. It may be that we need to kind of change the way that we kind of sell these projects. But many of the projects we do on the plant floor are absolutely have an impact on sustainability. They're reducing waste. They're increasing throughput. They're reducing energy usage. We absolutely should be going after these bigger picture things. And those budgets, if we're not the ones in this OT space who are going after that, where it's going is it's just going in the pockets of those high-priced consultants. The big 5 IT companies out there are going to find a way to sell a sustainability project. It won't have any impact, I can tell you right now, but they'll have lots of beautiful PowerPoints by the end of it. And they will sell a big sustainability project and they will take those millions. And no actual gain will happen on the plant floor. So let's, as an industry, let's start to go after those bigger things. When I started my career here, when we went into the meeting, it was all OT folks. It was engineers, and these are the folks who kept the plant running. And that's the folks who we met with. Nowadays, I mean, half the room is IT. And honestly, in many of these cases, these projects are actually coming from the IT budget or the corporate budget, not from the OT budget. It was crazy to me. I would always see these OT folks who had to just scrape and scrounge and beg and steal for the money they needed to keep the plant running. Now, this is the heartbeat of the company. Without that, you have nothing. If you're not making products, you're not making money. And they'd watch the IT group that would get millions of dollars for server upgrades and things like that. And I never want to disparage IT. I have a lot of respect for what they do too. But I think that it's time now for us to try to, with this IT-OT convergence, it opens up some doors. Let's go ahead and have those conversations, and let's make IT understand the impact that the plant floor has. And they want access to this data. Again, I keep coming back to that, but that's such a driver for a lot of these projects. They have seen the plant floor as a black box for a long, long time that they really had no access to. And so they want to crack that open. Great. I was speaking at a trade show and I was speaking to a group of OT. So these are folks who are high up within the OT organization. And I said, one of the things that you've got to do is when IT comes and they say they need access to such and such data, got to have it. Then the answer is, okay, then we need a DMZ. We need a real plant control network that's been tiered and that's been stratified and that's been divided off. And we need a true DMZ, and we need a real plant network architecture that's going to protect the resources down there. And guys, if you want access to that data on this piece of equipment, we've got to spend a couple million and we got to make some upgrades to this equipment, because that's the way the game is played in every other part of the business, right? They go, if you want this, here's the things I need. And for some reason in the OT space, we always have just kind of been reluctant to kind of play that game. And it's politics. And, typically we're engineers and we're kind of introverts and we're not really interested in any of that, but this is the game. And so I told this group of folks, I said, so the next time they want access to something, you say, got it, love it, will do. Here's the things that have to happen to make that happen.
Love it. A little bit of leverage. We were also talking before we started recording about a lot of companies have these sustainability goals that are starting in 2025, 2026 that they have to meet. And some of it's driven by legislation, love it or hate it. That's the reality. And this is a business opportunity for those willing to do it.
Yeah. So if you're doing a project and it's going to have some impact on energy usage, let's say, and you're going to reduce energy usage by 0.5% or 1% or something like that on a piece of equipment, you better be pitching that as a sustainability project. You better get access to some of those sustainability dollars because they're out there. And some of it even is coming from the government. They've got grants and things like that. But you better get access to those dollars and then go ahead and get some of your upgrades done to keep the plant floor running. And by God, like I said, with the folks leaving who knew how to maintain that stuff, we're going to need every upgrade we can get on the plant floor.
So switching topics entirely, let's talk a little bit about you.
Okay.
And if you had to choose a completely different career, what would it be?
It's an interesting question. So I started programming at a very young age. So I started programming in 6th grade. I learned BASIC, and then from there I learned C. And I just was always fascinated with programming. I was one of those rare kids who kind of knew exactly what I wanted to do at a young age. In high school, I signed up for every programming class that was offered in my high school. And then I went into college. I was programming on the side, teaching myself. And then I went into college and I just raced through a computer science degree. So for me, I probably would still be a programmer. I will say if I had not run into RoviSys at a career fair at the University of Akron and had a great conversation with one of the guys there who's still at the company, then I would not be in the manufacturing space, that's for sure. But I'd be programming somewhere. I'm pretty confident in that.
What's interesting to me is all these people who love programming, before there was programming, if that's your jam, what skill set did that translate to pre-industrial? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think that they probably would have been engineers. I think they would have been scientists. I think it's a similar kind of mindset as all of that. Mathematicians. It would probably be the folks who would have done the long form math and the slide rules and things like that to get us on the moon and to make bridges happen and things like that. I think it's that kind of thing. But boy, what a cool outlet. I feel very blessed to have grown up in the time that I did. I was 16 really when the internet kind of exploded onto the scene. And so I feel very blessed that I happened to pick this career and I happen to be passionate about it. And there was good money in it and, all of that good stuff. So yeah.
So final question, what is the best advice you could give your younger self just getting started?
I think it's the same advice that I give to the young folks. I mean, we hire about 90 to 100 people every single year over year at RoviSys, straight out of college. And that's just always how we've been. We just grow like that. And so I'm faced all the time with the same question from folks straight out of college. And so one of the things that I try to tell them, I give them the heads up. I go, okay, so at some point in your career, probably more sooner than later, you're going to face that imposter syndrome. How do you kind of face down that imposter syndrome? And so one of the ways that I tell them to do that is I tell them to internalize your successes. A lot of times, just as human beings, we beat ourselves up on our failures. And I mean, I still think about failures that happened to me 20 years ago. Like, who cares, right? But it will pop into my head at the weirdest time. It's just kind of human nature. It's how we do. We need to internalize our successes in the same way, where we're constantly reminding ourselves of, yeah, I did that. Remember 2 years ago when I walked out of that meeting and I just nailed it? Like, yeah, I did that. That's part of the way that you get over that imposter syndrome. The other way that I think is important is I tell them to be confident in what you know and be humble in what you don't know. You know more than you think that you do. And oftentimes, just the nature of our business, we really drive our young people very early on in their career. So they get opportunities that it would take 4 or 5 years in another company to get, within 6 months to a year, maybe they're on site. Now they're with a more senior person, but they're on site meeting with a customer face to face and really solving real problems in the real world with that customer. And so there's a certain confidence that helps to develop. And so they need to be confident in what they know and be willing to share that knowledge and be confident in that. But then they need to be humble about what they don't know. It doesn't happen often, but we've seen a couple times where somebody takes all those lessons we're trying to teach them and it kind of goes to their head, and then they think that they're God's gift to the world. And so it always needs to be tempered with humility. There's a lot that you don't know. In fact, there's a ton you don't know. So trying to find that balance between those two things, I think, is really important. But if you can do that, I think it really helps to get over that whole imposter syndrome thing.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Talking Industrial Automation. If you are interested in learning more about Bryan or RoviSys, you can find them on the Industrial Automation Exchange at www.csiexchange.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Bryan, for joining me today.
Thank you, Lisa.
If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also really help the show by leaving a review and sharing with colleagues. We're all just slaves to the algorithm now, so I gotta ask. Thanks for listening to the Talking Industrial Automation podcast. Thanks also to bensound.com and Wistia for the music bumpers. Until next time.